So every time I walk into a classroom to teach English, I know these questions are coming. Questions like, Sir, how can I improve my grammar? How do I build my vocabulary? How can I get an English accent? Now, on the surface, these seem like three different questions. But after teaching for years, I've realized they're all really asking the same thing. Sir, how do I stop translation in my head? How do I start thinking in English directly? Now, many learners believe that one day after they have mastered enough grammar or memorized enough vocabulary, thinking in English will happen automatically. I used to believe that too. I thought if I just learned more grammar, collected more words, and spoke a little more, one day my brain would finally stop translating. But that day never came. Not because grammar isn't important, certainly not because vocabulary doesn't matter. They absolutely do. But they are not what frees your mind from translation. And that's something I wish someone had told me years ago. Today, I want to answer that question, not as an English teacher or a communication coach, but as someone who has once asked the very same question and eventually discovered the answer by going through the process. I genuinely believe if someone had shared this method with me when I was younger, it would have saved me years and years of wrong practice. To understand how I eventually started thinking in English, I have to take you back to where it all began. I grew up in a small village in Himachal Pradesh. At home, we spoke Pahari. Outside with friends and relatives, it was mostly Hindi. English entered my life through school. And for a long time, it never felt like my language. It felt like the language of textbooks. We used it in exams, homework. Also, this language felt like for those people who were smarter and more confident than I was. Whenever I wanted to say something in English, my mind followed the same routine. First, I thought in Hindi, then I searched for the English words, then I worried about the grammar, then I wondered if people would laugh at my pronunciation or wrong English. By the time I had finished thinking, the moment to speak had already passed. Looking back now, I realize I wasn't struggling because English was difficult. I was struggling because I was trying to build every sentence from scratch. Every conversation felt like solving a puzzle. And the strange part was, I believed this was how everyone learned English. I thought one day after enough grammar books, enough vocabulary lists, and enough practice, my brain would suddenly stop translating. I kept waiting for that day. It never arrived. But looking back today, I can see something that my younger self couldn't. I wasn't failing because I didn't know enough grammar. I wasn't stuck because my vocabulary was too small. I was stuck because I misunderstood what language really is. I treated English like a subject. I thought language lived inside grammar books, inside dictionaries, inside vocabulary lists. So every time I wanted to become better at English, I reached for another book. I kept adding knowledge, but I wasn't building a language. And there's a difference. Because language isn't something that you store. It's something you experience. Think about your mother tongue. You did not learn it by memorizing grammar rules. You learned it by listening, by noticing, by copying, by using it every single day. But somehow, when it came to English, I forgot that. I expected to study my way into fluency, when what I really needed was to live with the language. That was the biggest shift. The day I stopped asking, how can I learn more English? And started asking, how can I spend more time with English? Now, if this were a typical success story, this is the part where I would tell you that I found the perfect book. But that's not what happened. The real turning point was much quieter. One day, my grandmother gave me a dictionary. At the time, it did not feel like a life-changing gift. It was just a dictionary. But somewhere along the way, something unexpected happened. I became curious. I became curious with words. I wasn't reading now because someone had asked me to. Certainly not because I wanted to become fluent. I just became fascinated by words. I would look up one word, then another, then another. Sometimes I would discover a word I had never heard before. Sometimes I would find two words that meant almost the same thing and wonder why both existed. Sometimes I would just enjoy the sound of a word and a sentence. For the first time, English stopped feeling like something I had to learn. It became something I wanted to explore. And that's a very different relationship with the language. Looking back today, I don't think the dictionary changed me. My curiosity did. Dictionary was simply where that curiosity found a home. Now, once curiosity entered the picture, something else began to change. English slowly escaped the classroom. I started noticing it everywhere, on shows like Kaun Banega Crorepati, in movie dialogues, in songs. It had always been there. The difference was I had finally started paying attention. Whenever I heard a sentence that I liked, I remembered it. Sometimes I would repeat it, while sometimes I would try using it in a conversation. Not because someone told me to, but because it simply felt right. Without realizing it, I had stopped treating English like a subject. It had become part of my everyday life. Looking back, I think that's what made the biggest difference. I wasn't collecting grammar rules. I wasn't memorizing long vocabulary lists. I was simply spending more time with the language. And every conversation, every song, every sentence I admired quietly became a part of me. I did not notice it then, but my mind was slowly building a place where English no longer felt unfamiliar. It started feeling natural. I still remember one incident from school. One day, I was asked to deliver an impromptu speech on cleanliness. I had about 10 minutes, no script, no preparation. I walked onto the stage, looked around, and the first sentence that came out of my mouth was this: "Look around your feet, you'll see a lot of trash." And after that, I finished the speech and went back to my seat. That was it. I did not think much about it. Years later, when I looked back at that moment, I realized why it had stayed with me. I hadn't searched for those words. I hadn't translated them from Hindi. I simply looked at what was in front of me and expressed that thought in English. It happened so naturally that I didn't even notice it at the time. And I think that's how thinking in English begins for most people. Not with a grand moment, just an ordinary moment that only becomes meaningful when you look back. Now, for a long time, I thought that moment was just a coincidence. But today, I think I understand what was happening. I didn't start thinking in English because I had decided to think in English. My mind had been preparing for that moment for a long time. Every conversation I had listened to, every movie dialogue I had repeated, every interview, every speech, every song, every sentence that had stayed with me had quietly become a part of how I understood the language. So when I stood on that stage, my brain didn't have to build a sentence from scratch. It already had enough pieces. All it had to do was express what I was seeing. That's when I realized something. Thinking in English isn't the first step in learning a language. It's one of the last. It happens after you've spent enough time listening, observing, and using the language. You don't wake up one morning and decide to think in English. One day, you simply notice that you already are thinking in English. Sometimes I wonder, if I could go back and meet my younger self, what would I tell him? I don't think I will tell him to study more grammar or memorize 1,000 new words. I would tell him to spend more time with English, to watch more interviews, to listen carefully when people speak, to notice sentences that make him stop and think. That sounds beautiful. I would tell him to borrow those sentences, to use them without worrying if they sounded perfect. I would tell him to read because he is curious, not because there's going to be a test tomorrow. Most importantly, I would tell him to stop waiting for the day when he finally feels ready, because that day doesn't come first, it comes later. You become ready by using the language before you feel ready. Looking back, I don't think I needed more information. I just needed more experience with English. And if I had understood that earlier, I think my journey would have been a lot simpler. So, can you really think in English? Yes, but probably not in the way most people imagine. See, it doesn't happen on the day you finish a grammar book. It won't happen if you memorize 10,000 words. And certainly it doesn't happen because you wake up one morning and decide, from today, I'll think in English. It happens much more quietly than that. It happens when you spend time with the language, when you listen, when you read, when you notice, and you borrow, and you use. Then slowly, without realizing it, your brain starts recognizing. English becomes familiar, and one day you'll answer a question or react to something or describe what you are seeing, and only afterwards will you realize, wait, I didn't translate that. Now that realization doesn't feel dramatic. In fact, it feels so ordinary that you might just miss it. Just like I did. Today, whenever a student asks me, "Sir, how can I think in English?" I still help them with grammar. I still encourage them to build their vocabulary. Those things matter. But now, I also tell them something I wish someone had told me years ago. Don't try to force your mind to think English. Fill your life with enough English that thinking in English becomes the natural outcome. Because thinking in English isn't where the journey begins. It's where the journey quietly arrives.